Good evening, everyone. I think we're going to get started. It's about 6:05. My name is Eric Cousins, Planning and Permitting Office for the City of Auburn. We're here for a discussion about some proposed changes to our comprehensive plan. And the council had appointed a comprehensive plan committee last fall. The committee's been working over the winter to come up with some draft changes to our comprehensive plan in three general areas: recreation, transportation, and future land use. The future land use map really lays out the plan for zoning changes over time, not necessarily all at once. And that's been one of the major updates that is being proposed. We're here to make sure people understand what's being proposed, have an opportunity to provide feedback to staff, city council, and planning board. We have an online survey that we would ask that anybody who would like to, please fill that out, provide your feedback that way, as well as any questions or comments at these meetings. Will help the council make decisions about what changes are made to the comprehensive plan at this point and then in the future. And we'll also have a number of other topics coming up for changes after these three are considered and brought back to the planning board and council. As I mentioned, there are three sections. Chapter 1, Section E, there are some recommendations around recreation and open space. Chapter 1, Section G, transportation, in particular the potential for a Turnpike Interchange and some infill development opportunities that are part of that. And Chapter 2, the future land use plan, sort of a citywide look at what kind of growth the city would like to see or expect to see over the next 10 to 15 years. I'll first turn it over to John Blaze, our urban development specialist, to talk about the recreation section.
All right, thanks, Eric. So recreation, the committee put together some great things, and I just want to quickly go over the highlights. Essentially what they focused on in rewriting or renewing, updating the comprehensive plan. And one is they really want to promote tourism in the area, create public space for everybody, equitable, make sure everyone gets a chance to get to public areas. They want to link existing trail networks. And I think the next one goes right with that. Not only the trail networks in Auburn, but also the surrounding communities. They want to expand programming, so all the different types of recreation programs, all age groups. Not only is it just going to be kids, but older folks as well, and middle-aged people. We really want to get everybody involved in the recreation in the city of Auburn, particularly the people that live here. We want to use art to expand our user group and our stakeholder group. I think that's great, to really get a new user group to be interested in recreation and what we have here in the community. We want to continue to seek local, state, and grant opportunities. If there's a dollar to be found for the community, we want to bring it here. I think that's what that says. We really want to get the money here. We want to get the trails built, the access to the lakes and the rivers and the streams. And then continue to support clubs and nonprofits. I think that we can look at the local snowmobile club, and there's 3 of them in the community, and how well they've done. And not only does the snowmobile club, people build off of that, right? So there's other users throughout the community that benefit from the support of those clubs, like the mountain bikers and the fat bikers. They have really fat tires on mountain bikes, and they use it during the winter as well. So not only is there one user group, but there's multiple user groups. And then throughout the year, the hiking and things like that. And then lastly, enhance the capital improvement program. So funding has to, there has to be some baseline funding that will match local, state grants and things like that. And then just general opportunities for recreation to improve the facilities, continue mowing lawns, making improvements, putting in different types of recreational facilities. So that was a big part of the focus. I think another one, basically the value statement, we really got to kind of focus on that. And that's really the opportunity for everybody, okay? Everybody has, different levels of what recreation is, but we want that to be available to anybody. It doesn't matter who you are, we want you to get outside and enjoy the recreation in Auburn. This is real specific information that can be found in the revised comp plan. I'm not going to read down through it, but specifically, if we want to look at specific water bodies, for example, it goes into a lot of detail in the comprehensive plan, but we talk about the Androscoggin and the Little Androscoggin rivers. We talk about Lake Auburn, Taylor Pond, World River, Basin Pond. So we're not just focusing on one area, but any area that has, water access, we really want to make sure that we've got it. Anywhere there's trails, we want to make sure that we're going to try to link those trails. Again, this is an outlook for 10, 15, 20 years. I think that's important. As we go through these updates, I think it's important to know that this is really just an outlook. It doesn't necessarily have to be very specific, but these are some of the things that we think that the committee thinks that's important for the next 10, 15 years for the community. And then lastly, I think something that's kind of new in the comp plan is sports tourism and bringing sports tourism to Auburn. Any questions? Yes.
I don't see anything in there for, I know the Auburn runoff was closed because of problems with water quality, but there's no public swimming. There's no pool anymore in Auburn. Has Auburn given any thought to doing a public pool for the citizens and the kids?
I think that's a great point. I think that in terms of sports tourism, I think that might be something that maybe.
No, but not for tourism, for the citizens who live here.
Right, I understand, but I think it's really, that is a portion of what they may be studying. And then there's the public access piece to some of the local lakes that may promote that over the next, 5, 10, 15 years.
What local lakes?
Again, it could be Lake Auburn, it could be Taylor Pond. I think those are probably the focus areas. Basin Pond. I think those are the focus areas for, again, public access that would promote swimming in the local area.
I think there has been an ongoing discussion about the water quality issue that you mentioned and whether or not there's a way to make that Lake Grove Park area safe for swimming again. And there's also been some discussions about other agencies like the YMCA possibly having a public swimming pool and the City of Auburn possibly having a splash park or some type of a water play space, not necessarily a full swimming pool.
Yeah, and I guess to kind of build off of that, sorry, we'll answer your question here. We talk about grants and you talked about water quality. There's 319 grant opportunity that the Maine DEP gives out. I think that this community may set up well to get one in the future over the next 5, 10, 15 years. I think that that's an opportunity, and they specifically address a lot of the camp roads, private camp roads around the lakes. They also address any kind of erosion and runoff that's happening and could address some of the situations that you're speaking about. Yes?
To address your concern about a pool, when we were building and planning the new high school, that was one of the things that we thought might like to be put into the high school, but the cost of the upkeep of it was extraordinary. So we decided that we would not build a pool into our new high school. So we had thought about it 3 or 4 years ago.
Just to tag on to that point, I know Auburn, it sounds like you wanted to become a big, booming, wonderful city, and a pool is so essential. Our kids in the Lewiston, Auburn area have very limited access to a pool. In fact, it's don't have our YM anymore, that pool, and I think it's awful that our high school couldn't, we can't support a pool. But talk about tourism, I'd much rather see our kids here learn how to swim than some other kind of limited tourism like playing hockey or, anyways. And also Lost Valley, they've had a resurgence. I'd like to see more support from Auburn put into the Lost Valley area. That's tourism. And that's for our local kiddos.
I think that's all great, and I just wrote it down, and I'll take that back to the committee. I really appreciate that.
Yes?
Why not something like a bird sanctuary? A lot of birds out there. I mean, you got the thorn crag in Lewiston. There's a lot of space, benches, parks. It's good for locals and tourists.
There is talk about, in the natural resource section, and there was a comment the other night about making sure we reference conservation here in the recreation section, but Mount Appetite and some of the other parks certainly serve a similar function to Thorn Crag, even though it lacks the name bird sanctuary.
Yeah, but you got nowhere to sit. You don't have a pagoda or
So, so sitting down is important while doing this. We can add that as a comment into the,
benches and tables are not that expensive in terms of a city budget. And then, something to shade you from the sun. Not a big investment, and it's a huge return. Because people got gas, stuff with restaurants. I mean, that's what people do.
If I, just real quick, I'm Jason Levesque, I'm the mayor, and I want to listen to everybody's feedback, but certain things, pools, swimming, we've talked a lot about it, we're right there with you, absolutely. We're in the budget process now, we have line items for benches and such like that. If you could send us some emails and suggestions on placements of that and so forth.
Sure.
It's the right time. So anything like that's kind of separate from comprehensive plan, because it's more an operational issue, but that's frankly great feedback. And we have it already as a line item, the placing it is going to be key.
Okay.
So that's awesome, thank you.
Sure.
we had someone else, yep.
I think another thing in terms of tourism that people have commented to me is going to focus agritourism. In addition to sports tourism, that could be withdrawn as something that we have here in Auburn that we don't, that other cities around us do not have. So we have to include that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Susan.
Tiz?
I want to support the position of making sure we put residents first. Tourism is great, but we need to be providing for our current customers. We talked about parks, and there's a place, I'll send you a list, I hope everybody else will look on that, to do the same. But Auburn, you look at last year, I think it's now maybe, I'll say last year, the National Park Recreation Association had a program done by mayors, 10 minutes to your nearest park. Well, A, I don't live 10 minutes near a park, and lots of people don't. And two, what I would consider my neighborhood park of the past, Drummond Street, is sad and pathetic. So before we put money into Mount Appetite and that, I hope somebody does a needs assessment and looks at places like in Drummond Street for one. And with that, where else we could have open spaces. Danville people, they're gonna drive 20 minutes into town. We don't have a park out there. And everybody here could probably name a location. But we need to put residents before tourism in our list of priorities, and we need to be looking at using what Auburn has, which are parks, great outdoor spaces, agricultural tourism, outstanding. Yes, support Lost Valley because it's the biggest little ski area, but make sure that we have other locations because not everybody can drive to Lost Valley.
And one of the things is that the city council actually last night voted to include in our budget, really doing a great job with parks for kids. And I can't, they did a survey, the rec department did a survey of all the parks that currently exist, really looked into it, and then began to cost out what it would take to be able to create these theme parks. And I mean theme parks like a water park, a forest park. So that's something that the city has thought about, particularly in terms of young families and kids. So that is a focus for us right now.
But you have to remember that our median age is over 58, so our park should have that. And this year, it's not in the room, I don't think, but from day one, when she's talking about parks, she's talking about those data. And we like we're all encompassing, so you not only take care of people with disabilities and children, but adults, so balancing, strength, swimming. I just came from a 4.5-month trip, and every community I was in had a park location where you could walk and you could do these little exercises and signs, and that was not just kids. So it's great you're doing kids, but we've done a great job with since I was a kid. We need to be looking at the over 21 and less than 100 people.
Thank you. Yeah, I do want to mention that Anniversary Park is relatively new in terms of updates. We put, what, $1.3 million into it recently. We've been there the last couple of days. We're looking at doing some more things in terms of a sculpture and bringing art to that park, or additional art. I just want to say it's a beautiful place. It's right there by the river where the Little Andro comes into the Androscoggin River. You know, I think when we talk about capital in the community, in parks, this is a great example of one.
I think we need to remember, and I think, Tim, you were on the walk with us, with Bob and I and Leroy, when we did the walk around the river a couple of years ago. And the comment was, who takes care of this? Because there were things that were deteriorating already on the river walk. Right? So no matter how many parks we make, how many wonderful things we do, we also need to supply the money to keep them up afterwards.
Right.
And we don't do a good job with that.
Yeah, and in the highlights, if you remember the highlight, that first slide there, enhance the capital improvement program, that's getting to that point exactly. Eric?
The transportation section, the second portion that the committee has made recommendations on, set a few goals to utilize all roads and support and drive real estate growth patterns. So really thinking about transportation in a way that creates or improves development opportunities, not just repaving a road, but thinking about directing our zoning to provide growth opportunities where the transportation system supports it, and any new transportation systems to make sure that they're sited efficiently from a cost perspective to allow for the best amount of growth in the areas that the city chooses it. Maintain and design a network of safe roads, taking a look at all of our major routes, all of our roadways, and focusing a lot on safety. Maintain and enhance a multimodal hub. That's both for freight, the airport, freight rail out by the airport, our industrial zone. There's been a lot of interest in logistics or transportation-based businesses. We're still seeing a lot of interest. We expect some growth in that area. And also in passenger rail. One of the requirements of passenger rail is that you have enough population near a stop in order to make it economically feasible. So this group really focused on creating density opportunities near the core of the city or where passenger rail may be possible. One of the major components of their work was focused on the potential for a new Turnpike Interchange and the infill development opportunities that would create. In the past, the city has looked at a Turnpike Interchange in the New Auburn area, and really that was focused on creating new commercial or industrial opportunities in an area where the community really didn't want to see that and was concerned about the traffic that would create. Truck traffic in particular has come up a number of times at these meetings. This committee, I think, for the first time, really envisioned something completely different than what was talked about in the past, and looked at it as a way to better integrate the Maine Turnpike into our local road network, give people an additional access point that would allow for us to really re-envision what Washington Street North is. Washington Street North, every time we talk about our gateways, that's the one that most people bring up. And it's really not a good representation of Auburn. When you get off the Turnpike in Auburn and drive that corridor to the north, it gives people a bad impression of the community. We've been unable to change that. That roadway really has tried to serve high mobility and a lot of traffic, but also serve that with a lot of driveways, curb cuts, and turning traffic, which the two of them just don't go well together. This group really envisioned a Turnpike interchange, providing the opportunity to offer the house lots, the neighborhoods that people love in New Auburn. Walkable neighborhoods, quarter-acre house lots in that range, even smaller in some cases for concentrated neighborhoods, but allowing for that type of infill development to be the driver of a new Turnpike interchange. And that infill could really occur on outer South Main Street, inside the Turnpike, from the Turnpike north to the core of the city, essentially from Vickery to the main Turnpike. It could also occur as you extend back towards Witham Road. See if I can use my cursor here. South Main Street is here, Main Turnpike here. An interchange somewhere in that area that connects people to both South Main Street and Riverside Drive and possibly back to Washington Street could really allow for some infill residential development on Outer Broad Street, Witham Road, South Main Street, and those surrounding areas. Not really offering something different than what we have available in New Auburn, but offering it to more people, creating additional grid street systems and that infill development. One of the main hangups in past Turnpike discussions is that there are always environmental impacts when you're building something as large as a turnpike. And the Army Corps of Engineers and the Maine Turnpike Authority really take a close look at whether or not those impacts provide the best opportunity for smart growth in relation to those improvements. And the approach that this group has taken to really focus on infill development from Washington Street through New Auburn and not new commercial development off of a new Turnpike interchange really could hit some of the weak points that the previous discussions had failed to do. Washington Street, if there was a new Turnpike interchange, a lot of the people using the Auburn exit to get to the New Auburn area, or even South Auburn, wouldn't have to use Washington Street to get there. And also it would allow for zoning and land use changes along Washington Street to encourage mixed use development along that corridor, and eventually move the northbound traffic on Washington Street into the right-of-way that is now southbound Washington. It's long been a goal of the city to do that. When Washington Street southbound was built, the right-of-way was acquired around 1956, and that right-of-way is as wide as the main Turnpike right-of-way. And it was always intended to provide for fast-moving traffic, very few turning movements. The state of Maine has bought all the access rights other than the ones that currently exist along that stretch of roadway. And if we could move traffic, northbound traffic on Washington Street, into that right-of-way, even if they're on a single roadway, not a divided highway, you could slow down the northbound Washington Street, really create a mixed-use district that allows for commercial and residential development, start thinking about sidewalks and crosswalks, and it could become much more of like a Route 1 business corridor, or Gorham has done something similar where you can move the fast-moving traffic that doesn't want to stop here, they just want to move through that section to a different roadway, and really start to make Washington Street North a walkable, more appealing street than it ever has been. And sort of finish the plans that were started in the 50s when they bought the right-of-way, intending to do that. Any questions related to that infill development or Turnpike? Yes.
I have a couple of questions. I see in your graph that annual Turnpike trips are really not increasing. So I'm wondering about the need for this exit. I understand that the proposed need is that we build more houses, but you're going to jump people out on 136, which is a single lane road with about 6 inches of a bike lane, frequent bus stops, in the middle of pretty much nowhere. For what reason? I'm already taking my life in my hands trying to ride a bike on that road, and now you're going to be bringing in more cars there. It's 6 miles into town from where I live in South Auburn. I can take back roads to get to my house fine from the exit that we already have. It's 6 miles, even less than that to my house. So why do I need this exit? What does it do for the residents of South Auburn?
Yes, so your observation is right on. There is not a need for a turnpike exit related to roadway capacity. And that's kind of where the argument, I think, has fallen flat in the past, is that there's a congestion problem and we need to fix it by adding an exit. That's not the case. There's plenty of capacity in Washington Street North and southbound. Washington Street North in particular is just not safe. It can move more cars, but it's not a safe roadway with all the turning movements. And it really is to better integrate the turnpike so that there are a lot of people using roadways between the current exit and the proposed exit that wouldn't have to use those local roadways if there was another point at which they could use the turnpike for a larger portion of their trip. So it's really to be able to spread some of the local roadway traffic onto the turnpike better, because there's an incredible amount of capacity in the main turnpike that's not being utilized, and that's part of it is to better utilize that.
What's the cost of spreading this out?
The cost of spreading the traffic out?
Yeah,
We don't have exact costs on what the construction would be.
how much does it typically cost to build an exit off of the turnpike?
Yeah, I honestly don't have an exact number. I think if this is an idea, I don't think would be even fair to use previous estimates from 10 or 20 years ago in today's construction costs. But if this is an idea that the community wants to pursue, then there would be a detailed study to really look at how would the car movements change, which trips would be diverted to the main turnpike that currently use other roads, and also look at multiple alternatives, figure out which one is most cost effective and which one has the least amount of environmental impact. But that,
Could you give me an idea of what it cost 10 years ago to build something like this?
I think it was in the $20 million range, but I could get those numbers from the past study, so don't quote me on that number, but I think it was around there.
So at least $20 million to spread out the traffic, which is not increasing at all according to that graph.
To use the turnpike to move some of those cars, yes.
Right? That's a lot of money. Okay.
Eric, who pays for that? Does the city pay for it or does the state pay for it? I mean,
So typically, there would be some kind of a split in cost for something like that. If there was, one way to do it would be to find some grant money for the initial study. The Maine Turnpike Authority and the city have paid for a study in the past, so we have some good baseline information on options. And the actual construction would typically be a three-way split between the community, based on the value of the new taxes they intend to create, the Maine Department of Transportation, and the Maine Turnpike Authority. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if what you've been considering in terms of improving bus transportation within Auburn and with Lewiston.
Yeah, there was some general discussion about bus transportation as part of the comprehensive plan, and there's a lot of language that supports better bus transportation.
It really is needed. There's
But
a lot of people that can't drive.
There's a study happening right now by Androscoggin Transportation Resource Center. In the past, we've just kind of looked at what kind of little tweaks could we make to our bus system to make it a little bit better. The study that's happening right now is a company that does this kind of work all over the country, but they are looking at, if we started from scratch, what would be the best bus system that we could create for the two communities. If you look at the AVCOG, Androscoggin Valley Council of Governments website, you can follow that process and provide feedback. But that's a good point. Tiz?
So we talked about the exit 77 in out that way, but the biggest problem that I see with roads and that has to do with getting to Farmington, that Route 4, Center Street, the trucks coming off and going through where they shouldn't be on the other side of the road and out the turn. And I don't hear that discussion, but that's a more critical I would say, equally dangerous situation, particularly when those GPSs are sending trucks down Center Street to Turner Street and trying to take a right-hand turn up Court Street. It's just ridiculous. So if we're going to decide to ignore that big problem, because it's too difficult to bite off and separate and look at this, but, you know, if you're looking at $20 million to put an exit in that goes into New Auburn, that New Auburn probably doesn't care if they're not going to have housing, and then where to, versus looking at the problem of Route 4, Center Street, people coming off and doing the back side of the lake. All
Yeah.
of these being dangerous places in all locations.
This came up as part of one of the other meetings. If we could move northbound traffic on Washington Street to a better controlled access type roadway with less turning movements, the trucks could move faster. Hopefully that would encourage them to stay on that main route instead of taking the hotel road route up the backside of the lake. Also, if long-term, if there was a connector back to Washington Street at Rodman Road, or, on 136, it would provide an alternative for trucks that are on a more controlled access route instead of driving through the city streets. There are a lot of trucks now. A truck destined for New Auburn is probably coming from the south, is probably getting off at the Turnpike exit in Auburn, driving Washington Street, and then going through High Street, Academy Street, Main Street, and really downtown streets that it's tough for trucks to move through. Another exit would provide an alternative to that if they're really not destined for that.
I can see that benefit from trucking to the New Auburn area and Main Street area. But again, if that's our only look, we're missing a bigger picture of it. Based on the volumes of trucks. It was this current mayor, but a mayor, who talked about the percentage of transportation that has to go through Auburn to go to Farmington, points that direction.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Mine's more of a statement. I'm a transplant from California 11 years ago. So I'm real familiar with freeways, on-ramps, off-ramps. She nailed it. There's going to be a lot more trucking, small trucks, big trucks, traffic. These streets are not made for any really increase in volume. It's going to impact the people who live there real bad. They are going to be pissed when it goes through, if it goes through. Just saying.
I know part of the goal of the committee was all of that distance between where we have an exit now and this proposed exit, it could remove a lot of the trucks from those local roadways and put them back on the main turnpike, was one of their goals.
Well, it won't. I'm just telling you.
Yeah,
I 40 years on freeways, so it's like Field of Dreams. You build it, they will come.
and that'll have to be looked at closely if there's a decision made to really dig into the details on how traffic would change with that exit.
I know traffic. I spent hours, an hour. I spent years of my life in traffic. That's what will happen. You will have very many pissed off voters. You all. Just let you know.
Andy?
Yeah, Eric, one of the concerns I have is, I've always wondered, the comprehensive plan, how powerful is it? How binding is it on future councils and future staff? I found that some folks think that it's really binding, that once the council votes for a comp plan, it needs to be followed. So to have something as specific as this go into a comp plan that future councils are going to be tied to have to debate and approve is not a good thing to use the comp plan for. Now, if it's a general statement, let's help improve traffic in certain areas, generally, then that's good, we should be looking at that. But if we're specifically saying in the comp plan, yeah, we gotta have a new exit, that ties future councils to almost like they have to go along with it because, hey, the comp plan said it. And I'm still a little bit confused about the comp plan, whether it does encumber future lawmakers or future elected officials as to having to follow the comp plan because it was voted on. And this is too specific, I think, for something like the comp plan.
So there would have to be a lot of study and really specific details looked at, so maybe something along the lines of investigate some of these ideas would be more acceptable. Yeah, it doesn't completely bind the council, but it does tell the community and the investors and other transportation agencies what our goals are so they can be looked
Well,
into.
if that were true, but I think I've had too many times said to people, well, this is in the comp plan, we have to follow through with this.
Yeah? Yes, ma'am.
Did you say at another meeting that the city council wants to try to have a vote on this by July?
So I know there's a desire to move some of the comp plan recommendations through the process of consideration and public input and adopt some this summer, yeah. That can be adjusted based on the council's desires, but that is one of the goals.
That wouldn't give much time to really assess some of these big decisions.
It wouldn't study a new turnpike interchange, certainly. This would give the direction that it's something that we want to investigate over time, if it remains part of the plan. But it would be much longer term for actual implementation of all of these ideas. So the outside of that sort of infill opportunity and turnpike transportation related portion of the plan, we've been given a goal, both staff and the committee, to create new opportunities for housing in Auburn. Housing supply has gotten much tighter, prices are rising, and one way to help make sure that housing is accessible is to make sure that there's still some inventory left for new housing. The committee laid out the goals, allow for additional flexibility in zoning, reduce the number of zoning districts. We have a number of zoning districts that really aren't all that different between each other. And there was a goal to try to combine some of those so our zoning ordinance could be simpler for people to follow. Attract new residents or workforce. We continue to hear from businesses in the community that one of their limiting factors to growth right now, the business is there, the demand is there for their products, but they can't find help, can't find enough people to fill the positions that are qualified for the jobs that they have available. Ensure equitable access. That's really to all housing types. One of the goals of the committee was to make sure that they weren't creating just opportunities for single families or just opportunities for multi-families, but that there were new opportunities for all types of housing. And then to maximize the use of existing infrastructure and also any expanded infrastructure. We'll talk a little bit more about densities. At this point, the committee's really looked at where would it be possible to extend sewer, and they've made some recommendations about increasing density in those areas, depending on feedback and what the community thinks about different areas. That could be refined again, and then another refinement would have to be made when we look at where are the most affordable places to create the infrastructure, the water and sewer, utilities in particular, to create the number of housing opportunities that the community is looking for.
Could I just ask a question? This bottom photo,
Yes,
that's on Grace Lawn, is that true?
yes,
Okay, so sidewalks were put in, but then the sidewalk ends as you go to the cemetery section. So residents will have to cross the street over near the hockey rink in order to, say, get to Starbucks or walk across the street to Walmart. So the sidewalks end. It was a nice attempt, but then they have to cross a very busy street to get to the extended sidewalk. I just thought Auburn would do more
yep.
and make it more of a walking, there are destinations for those residents to do some shopping, but it stops when you have to cross that road.
And there is a city project planned from Grace Lawn to St. Dom's to connect up to the ball fields. I know that's not done yet, but it will be shortly. And it's good feedback on the mall area. We couldn't make this particular development create sidewalks in a much larger area than what they did. But we're trying to fill in those gaps, and that still is one of the gaps that
Well,
needs to be
was
filled.
that the developer's choice or the city's choice?
The city required the sidewalk extension, and the developer built it into their project budgets.
So going forward, would you expect developers to understand the infrastructure that we in the city want? We want sidewalks all around for all the residents, you know, being a pedestrian is really important.
Yep.
But a developer does not care.
Yeah, we did require that they extend sidewalks. And we also have a tax increment finance district that helps pay back some of the cost for those sidewalks. And could help pay for extensions in the future. There's always a balance between how much can that project afford and still happen versus what the city's goals are, kind of beyond the project impact.
That's my biggest fear of, you know, equity housing, or, you know, having more housing opportunities. We're going to get developers in, and we're talking slapstick cheap, you know, buildings with, no code enforcement. And that's a big fear.
Yep. No,
Is that
that's a good.
keeping Section 8 housing, looking like Section 8 housing?
These,
I don't think that's what we want.
these were pulled as examples of the types of densities that are being discussed. I can tell you at Gracelawn, our inspectors, our code enforcement officers were part of that construction process. Those all meet the state building codes, meet or exceed. They're really very nice apartments.
They look nice.
Yep.
But then other places there, you know, the buildings behind the library that were refurbished, those are horrendous.
Okay.
People get to sit on railroad tracks, I've seen it daily. That's where they go and sit and chat with one another.
That's come up as a comment at another meeting too. There's, they have access to the public spaces, but it seems like they're using that instead of the public park. Bonnie?
This, Gracelawn, the developer of Gracelawn is also going to be developing on the North River Road, right?
Yes. Not the exact same ownership, but there's a strong relation with some of the investors.
And will they look like this?
Yeah, very similar. The founding,
Going back to the sidewalk situation, that's gonna jump right out onto Center Street almost, too. So will there be sidewalks coming down from the development down the North River Road going to, Wendy's or any of those places that are there?
so we're talking about that now. We'll be bringing that in front of the council, but one of the goals is to, when it comes for tax increment financing, just because there may be some people that aren't familiar with it, when we create a new dollar of tax revenues because somebody builds a building that creates new value, the city loses between 40 and 50 cents of each of those dollars to a shift in school funding. As Auburn becomes more valuable, the state says you can afford more of your own school funding and they reduce our state subsidy. And also in state revenue sharing for general government services, as the city becomes more valuable, they reduce the amount that comes back to the city to help us support local services. And also in the share of the county tax that Auburn pays. If Auburn becomes more valuable in relation to the other towns that are part of the county tax base, then Auburn picks up a larger share of the county tax. There's a calculation that we do when we're considering new development, especially in the case when the city desires something like sidewalks already. It's something the city wants to pay for. We can shelter an amount of the new tax value from the state calculations and from the county tax calculations for up to 30 years. And what we try to do is shelter the right amount so the city doesn't lose their 40 cents on the dollar. And we can use that 40 cents on the dollar to pay for something that the city wanted anyways, like sidewalks. And that's being talked about on North River Road, to shelter some of that value, to be able to build out a sidewalk network that goes beyond just the apartments, but reconstructs North River Road, eventually all the way out to Stetson Road, and starts to fill in some gaps in sidewalks on Northern and North River Road.
Could I just ask why a developer wouldn't cover that cost, that infrastructure cost? Why wouldn't that be expected of the developer?
So there is an expectation that they contribute for recreation open space and also potentially for sidewalks. That's a discussion we're having, that whether or not the city would undertake that construction, or if there's some arrangement where the developer would undertake that construction as part of their project, and the city would pay back a portion of it because they're extending beyond the bounds of their project, with the dollars that would have been lost to the other tax calculations if we had not sheltered the value. That is one of the discussions that's happening.
Since we're talking about sidewalks, the city put in new sidewalks on Winter Street when they did repaving, and they put in a rubber curb on the corners that have little bumps on it that I think is for stability. And after the first year, they deteriorated whenever the snowplow went through, and they're all shredded now. And it's been years, and the city's not come back to repair or replace them.
Absolutely.
So, is the city responsible for that?
Yeah, we can talk to the Public Works Director. I'm not familiar with the exact, they're detectable ramps, I assume, at where the ramps come down to the street, so somebody with limited visibility is able to feel those bumps, but they should be replaced if they're damaged, so they know when they're crossing. I can talk to the Public Works Department about that. Yes, ma'am.
So my question or comment is, with this increase in a push for additional dwellings, I'm hoping and assuming that a concurrent study is being done on the impact to the schools and the number of children that would be, I mean, how many more new schools are we going to need as a result? And Tony Bonnie's nodding her head, so I'm sure you're involved in that, but it just comes to mind, that schools cost a lot of money too.
I'm not involved in that anymore, but it's my concern, having had the history of it. Have you included Adam Hansen and Connie Brown?
Yeah, so we, last fall, when the council was discussing goals around attracting new workforce, we talked to each department. One of the things that we found surprising, frankly, I guess, is we looked at all of the new housing units in Auburn over the last 10 years or so. And we also looked at, what type of housing they are, whether they're single-family, multifamily, and how the enrollment in each school district changed during that same period. It used to be that it was sometimes in the 1 to 2 students per household range was a fairly common number used in trying to calculate the costs of new dwelling units. We're really not seeing that in Auburn anymore. And it makes sense because family sizes are smaller, and we can see that in the census data. We're seeing about a third of a student per household as a change in school enrollment in each district. And they were all within, maybe 0.25 students to 0.33 students. And then when you got out to the high school level and looked at the whole city, the net change in dwelling units, it was right around, almost exactly 0.33. So the average was right around a third of a student per household. But we've also seen a lot of 1 and 2 bedroom units, which just don't contribute as many students. But it is something that we're talking about. It's something that we're looking at. The conclusion out of those discussions with the school department, fire department, police department, was that a mix, kind of a similar mix to what we've seen over the last 10 years in housing, we could accommodate up to around 2,000 residents without a significant capital outlay for new items. Yes, ma'am, way in the back. I don't think you've spoken.
No. I represent the real estate industry, and I've been doing real estate for 20 years. And Auburn is a beautiful area, and if we want to actually attract new residents, there's so many things that we could do. One thing that I found that's been a tough thing for me, selling property and trying to make a living here and help people in this area, is the zoning. There's a lot of agricultural zone, and that's good. I come from a family of farmers, believe me, and I appreciate it and I respect all of that very much. But times have changed, things are changing every year, And I think there's a really good, respectable way to maintain our city and the agriculture, and also implement new housing in some of these agricultural zones. The tax implication that we're going to receive for the city, because I'm hearing everybody, you know, and you're all talking about, we want to do this, but it costs money, we want to do that, but it costs money. And I agree, it's very expensive. But if we put these new homes in some of these agricultural zones, their taxes, because you got to know, Auburn, as a real estate agent, I have so many people that say, I don't want to live in Auburn, there's too many taxes, our taxes are so high. Or, I don't want to live in Auburn because the high school is so old, I want my teenagers to go to a really good school. Well, we're going to get a new high school, and I think that's going to attract a lot of people, but in order to do that, we need housing for these people. And the taxes that I can see, the average home, let's say up by Danville in that area, will produce anywhere from $4,000 to $7,000 a year in property taxes. I live on Lou Bear Way. I have a simple ranch, and I'm paying $4,600 a year for my house. And so creating these new homes is going to create a lot of revenue for the city. That's how I feel. And we can do it respectfully, and we can do it right, where everybody has a say in how we do it. But I think this town needs to generate younger people coming, you know, to this area. They're going to be working here. The kids are going to be going to school here. It's going to create a huge difference for this town. But we have to be willing to open our minds, open ourselves up a little bit to the possibilities of the rezoning of agricultural that we could use effectively.
A lot of hands. You in the middle, sir?
Yeah, I spoke with you about this the other day, Eric, and along with what this lady's talking about behind me. With the zoning, there's no way for us to go to the city and request zoning on our own properties. My property's on Hackett Road, south side of Hackett Road, from Broad Street to Turnpike. Behind me is Danville Corner Road. I'm surrounded by homes. The south side of Hackett Road is homes. With the exception of the hotel, Sleep Time Motel, that's all homes on that side. I have a piece of land that's industrial zone with no water, no sewer, no gas, there's no utilities, there's nothing. I can't sell, I couldn't get that anywhere. I'm paying an astronomical figure, I don't have a building on that, I pay almost $8,000 a year tax on a piece of land that I can't, I tried selling it. I couldn't give it away. And if there was a way that we could go on an individual basis, because there's a lot of people that don't want their zoning change, and I totally understand that. But somebody like me with this small piece, there's maybe 400 acres between myself and the abutters, they all have homes. But everything, they built an industrial zone at one point, I would imagine. But now I can't put that on my land.
We can take a look at that at the committee level as we're
But I guess I just need to know, how do I go about doing this? You know, I spoke with you, and that was great, but what's my next step?
Yeah, I think let's see what comes out of the current comp plan recommendations, and I can use yours as a great example with the committee on Thursday, and go from there, but check in periodically. Yes, sir, with the red shirt.
I'm not against growth, okay? I mean, my property values have gone through the roof since I've been here, okay? I'm pro-growth. I'm a capitalist. I'm all about the money, okay? 16 units an acre. It's all about the standard of living. At a certain point, it goes down. My kids were in a class of 40 when I left, okay? I came here, class of 20. You were at Fairview last year. I met you, took a selfie. My daughter went from D's and F's in a class of 40 to B's and A's because she started getting educated. You have a right to be worried about the schools being crowded. They will. It'll happen. To go from 2 houses to 8, that's 300% growth. It impacts the quality of life. That's what I'm going to do. That's why I'm willing to pay $4,200 in taxes on a family house.
That's what we're here for, to hear that type of feedback.
And to hear that I got a 6 apartment complex next to me on, I don't know how big of an acre, but the thing that's gonna happen, they're gonna tear it down, it's gonna get developed into a huge, what, 18, 20 unit? I'm gone. If that happens, I'm selling my house, I'm gone. My 4 kids will move somewhere else.
So thank you for the feedback, that's what we're trying to hear from you. Yes, ma'am, Matt?
Your picture of the homes in the agricultural zone with 1 or 2 kids, you're taxing them at $4,000 to $6,000 a year for the city. You're losing that just to pay for the schools for those kids. You're making no money off those families at all. And then I listened to reports of school committee meetings and city council meetings where we have city councilors saying, we got to cut the budget of the schools right now without even adding more people. And you've got, 22, 24 kids in a class right now with city councilors and the mayor saying we've got to cut the school budget and trim it down. I don't want to add more kids to that. I don't think it's a hospitable town that comes to supporting education here already. I can't imagine with 0.3 kids per dwelling, we got 16 dwellings per acre, 5 more kids per acre, throwing them into the schools where we have city councilors saying we got to cut the budget for the schools. Like, why do you want that? And I totally see this gentleman's point of view. You're going to add these houses, people are going to bring their kids with them, and you're going to have to expand services. I'm okay living in the agricultural zone and waiting until noon for my road to be plowed. I don't think 16 dwellings per acre in the agricultural zone is going to be really happy about waiting till noon for their roads to be plowed. But I'm okay with it. I'm okay that I can smell chicken manure all weekend long, 2 to 3 weekends a year. I don't think those dwellings are going to be too happy.
Oh,
You can say you support farms, but you don't understand everything that comes with living near a farm. Because I've lived near farms for 20 years now.
Jim, with all due respect to some of that, there's the next slide, because that's not proposed. Nobody's proposing any increased density in agriculture per se.
Not yet,
So-
but you build the turnpike, and then all of a sudden
So
you've got a
just
way to get there.
quick stats to piggyback off Eric, then we want to listen, and I think we need to watch the rest of the slides because we'll answer some of these questions. And then I think some good questions could be had. The goal that the council looked at, based upon the cost of service analysis they did, was 2,000 homes would equal 6,000 people over the course of a decade.
We grew
So-
400 people in the last decade according to the census.
That is the first time we've grown since 1960. So we probably have some catching up to do, but let's watch that.
Before you move on this, you haven't talked about housing rehab. We talked about equitable access, we keep talking about new housing, they're outside, like the race lawn and that. We have, I'm gonna call it downtown and in-town housing stock that needs some assistance. Those landlords and that could do more with their buildings if we incentivize them, but they're, again, between low-income housing where you get Section 8, people who have property cannot afford to invest and make it better. The downtown and in-town are really our historic district. When we talk about historic homes in Auburn, we are talking about downtown, in-town, Goff Street, Center, Court Street, Drummond Street, Spring Street. We're moving people out to dwellings like that, which are lovely, except those aren't for families. They're not particularly for young people, and they don't offer what young wanted. If you want young people and you want families, you need to have reasonable housing prices, and we need to fix what we have. We keep ignoring what we have and we say build more, build more. If we fix what we had, number one, we would get people moving into them, and number two, we would do something about what our city looks like. And we would provide housing opportunities for both young and old, because whether we like it or not, we're still getting old people, and to provide a concentration. If you want 73 people in a certain area, put it in our downtown and in-town by encouraging those people and providing them funding to fix those buildings and provide the services that are needed. So whether it's trash or paint or doorsteps or whatever, instead of saying, oh no, we'll get more of these.
So we'll,
Fix the downtown.
I think we'll hit on some of that with the maps that we're going to get into, but you'll see that the core, the downtown already allows for densities that are higher than what we're talking about here.
We're talking money.
So-
Not how many people.
So not only,
Money in those neighborhoods.
so the incentives don't always have to be money. So a lot of, in the urban areas, there are a lot of larger, older, single-family homes, could be 5-bedroom homes, where our zoning has prevented somebody from making that 5-bedroom home into a 2-bedroom home and a 3-bedroom home. And that alone, that rental income that can be created as part of rehabbing that can actually make the property viable for investment, whereas maybe it hadn't been in the past. So there is some thought given to that. When we get to the map, you'll see that the densities are higher in the core of the city. And then there's been a lot of discussion about how far out do we go with some of those densities. We're trying to figure that out with feedback. Yes, sir.
I have one question on the zoning, where you're changing your zoning. And you chose in prior meetings to eliminate changing anything in the low-density country residential. So you're going to allow somebody to have 7 or 16 units on 1 acre, but the guy who owns 3.5 acres in low-density country residential cannot have an in-law apartment or something.
So we'll get into the maps here in a second. There are some changes proposed, including in low-density country residential. But you're right, it reduces the frontage requirement, but what's proposed does not reduce the 3 acres per unit that currently is required.
Right, you can have 3.5 acres, but you can't have 2. You can't have like an in-law apartment, or you can't have a 2-unit.
Correct. Separate from the comp plan discussions, though, the council last night asked the planning board to look at our low-density country residential zone. It's our only residential zone that doesn't allow an in-law or a 2-family. All of the other residential zones already allow that. They've asked the planning board to look at whether or not we should change that. So they are considering that, and I think you should provide feedback to your councilors and/or the planning board to find that. So this starts to just try to familiarize us with the different colors that we'll see on the map. It's really difficult to look at the whole city and fully understand what the changes mean on a map of the whole city. This starts to show the colors that represent each type of zoning. At the end of this meeting, if people have questions about their individual properties, we have 3 computers set up in here, so we can take a close look at your neighborhood or your street if the summary doesn't cover that for you. Really, the committee focused on first infill development. That could be, to Tiz's point, it could be vacant lots. But in a lot of cases, in the case of our existing comprehensive plan, it's trying to create zoning that allows for people to create new rental opportunities in larger, older buildings that make them economically viable. Auburn provides some really nice rural housing opportunities. The committee still wanted to be able to provide some of those while still the proposal that we have is not extending into the agricultural zone. Elimination of parking requirements. Auburn has already allowed for parking to be provided in the downtown form-based code area by public parking within 1,000 feet. So I think the city's sort of been ahead of the curve on that. In rural areas, we still have parking requirements, and there's a consideration for reducing those further or possibly eliminating them. Creation of transitional areas. New Auburn is a perfect example. Should we pursue a turnpike interchange, or even without a turnpike interchange, if that's an area where the community wants to offer more walkable urban house lots? The comp plan has envisioned sort of a green belt around the existing built-up portion of New Auburn that extends along the Barker Mill Trail on Broad Street, crosses Broad Street, and connects through to Sherwood Heights School, and eventually over to South Main Street, and then through Houston Farm, and our cemeteries back down to Riverside Drive. When that vision becomes reality, there's a lot of city-owned properties already in that, or areas that allow for public access. There's really only a few short segments that are not built or not accessible by the public currently. That would allow for sort of another tier of residential development on the other side that could also take advantage of that trail system and rural sort of pathway around what is now the built-up portion of New Auburn. Again, more inventory to try to keep prices affordable and keep all types of housing available. This is a side-by-side. I mentioned it's a lot to take in. On the left is the existing zoning districts. On the right is the proposed. I think the biggest thing that this map attempts to display is that we are talking about the existing residential and commercial areas here and not changing the general boundaries of the residential and commercial areas as they relate to the ag zone. There's no extensions of residential strips still proposed, and those are sort of off the table at this point for the discussion. The density changes, traditional neighborhood. A lot of our current urban residential zone is proposed to become traditional neighborhood. Currently, quarter-acre lots. You can do 2 units on a lot of those parcels, so that's an increase of 6 to 8 units at the most now, up to about 16 units per acre. Suburban residential, which says water and/or sewer. It really requires sewer to get up to these types of densities, but it's much easier when you don't have to drill individual wells. Up to 8 units per acre. And we'll zoom in on the map here in a second to kind of look at where those areas are. Residential is the current rural residential zone. It's a 1 acre minimum lot size currently. Most of the areas proposed for this would have the frontage reduced from 250 feet to 100 feet, and the 1 acre minimum lot size would be changed to a half an acre, or 2 units per acre instead of 1 unit per acre. And then what is now the low-density country residential is proposed to have a name change essentially from rural residential. We would still retain, as this gentleman mentioned, it requires 3 acres per housing unit. The proposal is to retain that standard, but to reduce the amount of frontage required from 325 feet to 200 feet. Now, there are a lot of lots that have double the minimum lot size, but don't have 650 feet of frontage to allow for a lot split. And the group aimed to try to create some additional opportunities there for lots. The required public process, after the committee reported back to the council could have sent this to the planning board, hold 1 public hearing. Typically, there would be a council workshop after that, and then 2 public readings, and 1 public hearing would be required for adoption with a review by the state of Maine in between that first and second reading of the council. The council opted to make sure there was more opportunity for public input. That's why we're here at these meetings. They didn't feel that process was enough. And we're at the 3rd one tonight. The information that we gather from these meetings, the feedback that we gathered from these meetings, as well as the responses to the survey. I know John had informed me, I think on Monday, we were around in the 80s for responses on surveys. We only had about 40 last Friday, so we saw a big spike in responses over the weekend. I encourage you also, go to the city's website. If you use the search bar, put in the words comprehensive plan. The top choice that will come up will be the comprehensive plan update website that provides a link. Encourage your neighbors to fill it out, or anybody else that's interested as a taxpayer or property owner here in Auburn.
Yeah, so some of the feedback that we get was, that people are having a difficult time finding that survey, so we just put it right on the front page. So it's on the first page. When you go to the City of Auburn website, it's right there. Take the survey, click right on it, and go right through it.
The link to this map is also available on that same site. There's a couple of maps available. This one provides a side-by-side comparison, but doesn't let you search by address. So you kind of have to know where to look within the community to find your property. And I'll show you the other one in a section that also is linked to that website, where you can put in your street address and toggle between existing zoning requirements and the proposed zoning district. Yes, ma'am.
I cannot tell from the map on the left where the neighborhoods are and how they match up with what I know. And so I would ask you, if at all possible, to kind of walk us through the changes. Like that entire lavender area, where are we talking about? Is that Lake Street? Is it the Lake Street? I mean, there are traditional areas in Auburn that I can't quite figure out how it relates.
Yeah, that's what we're here for. And also, if we don't dial in sort of enough to see your individual street, we can do that individually at the end of the meeting. So this area is kind of the largest block of that lavender area. It's currently urban residential, so quarter-acre lots. You can get up to 6 units per acre currently, if you have some two families as part of that. And that is Western Avenue, Court Street, Lake Street, and kind of the outer part of Gamage Avenue, Park Avenue, right around to the Baptist Church, East Auburn Baptist Church, and in from there. That is proposed to go to the traditional neighborhood, which could be up to 16 units.
So it's
Currently, up to
so-
6 units and could be up to 16.
So it's the Lake Street School area, or the old Lake Street, and now the Park Avenue School area.
Yes, it
That's
is.
going from almost single family usually to up to 16 units?
So the draft proposes up to 16, but that's what we're here to hear feedback about.
That's astounding.
As you go out to the west from there, Stevens Mill Road, same current zoning, and some suburban residential, so half-acre minimum lots changing to 16 units per acre. The intent tonight is to focus sort of on South Auburn, but we'll work our way down there. There's minimal changes to the boundaries of the commercial districts. There's a couple of changes on corner parcels that are mostly commercially zoned in the existing zoning, but have one or two corners that are not commercially zoned. The corner of Manley and Rodman Road would expand the commercial zone slightly. The corner of Court Street and Stevens Mills Road, there's one corner at that intersection that is, there was a house torn down there this past summer. That's currently residential. That corner would be wrapped into the commercial zone as proposed. And really not any significant changes in the commercial zone boundaries. It's more so the densities. We discussed the Turnpike area. I'll zoom out here a little bit. So outer South Main Street, essentially from Loring to Vickery, and a little bit beyond Vickery, no, actually just to Vickery, would go from, right now it's urban residential, so up to 6 units per acre, quarter-acre lots as a minimum lot size for single-family homes, would go to the 16 unit per acre traditional neighborhood. And then when you get beyond that, outer South Main Street from Vickery to the Turnpike and potentially beyond the Turnpike onto Powell Road, Old Danville Road, it would be suburban residential zone, which is up to 8 units per acre. That again would require water and sewer to be extended, and certainly would be more expensive in that outer area to the south of the Turnpike than it would be on the inner area to the north of the Turnpike.
So the 16 acre things, what happened in California was there was a city called Cypress that was all 1 acre small farms, and then most of the homes in Southern California were 1/8 of an acre. You know, the small 1,200 square foot, 3-bedroom cut and paste. So what's gonna happen is the developers are gonna come in, they're gonna offer these families
Exactly.
a boatload of money,
Excellent.
and they're gonna sell. And they're gonna take the money. And all these 16 apartments are gonna come in, quality of life's gonna go down, crime's gonna go up, we'll need more fire department, more police. It's gonna happen.
Hold on, just to give you some data points, and we've been working with several universities around the country on this. Just so you know, it's economically unfeasible in Maine to buy 4 or 5 single-family homes, tear them down, and then build 16-unit properties away from services. Currently stands right now, excuse me, sir, as it currently stands on a market rate side, police and fire calls are substantially less. But also, looking at the economics, looking at the spread and how this works, that needs to be taken into consideration. Military taught me one thing about land use: topography dictates, terrain dictates.
I agree.
And a lot of this, if you look at it in a 3-dimensional topography map,
I understand.
you just couldn't get the density because we have ravines, wetlands, mountains, ledge, and so forth. So we all have some concerns, but we should probably temper that with the reality in a pragmatic way.
This mask is the new reality. Telecommuting is the new reality. That's why I've seen my prices. I bought my home for $140. Okay, I can now sell it for about $280 because I have gas that I hooked up. I remodeled my kitchen. Okay, I'm just telling you what I saw. The topography of California and Maine is the same. Nothing's flat. Everything is uphill and downhill. Same thing, same problems.
I am
A year ago,
really,
we would not be having this conversation on mask.
I am really concerned about what you were saying as well, because you said if there are services, I don't know exactly how you put it, but that's not going to happen where there aren't any services. The Lake Street area is a strong community area. You could buy how many houses in Lake Street and tear it all down and put up 16 multi-unit, whatever it is, and truly ruin the community that has developed and has been a real indication, a real strength of Auburn for years and years and years. And that's true of other communities as well. But it could be really.
Maybe Eric could talk about how planning board works, approval processes, and permits, because there are significant checks and balances throughout anything.
Well,
Don't
yeah.
get me wrong, I hope I'm wrong. I really do. I hope
Checks
you're
and
right and I'm wrong.
balances are nice, but a realtor that can go in and buy 4 houses for how much money, I really think you're jeopardizing the strength of the community that has built up over the years.
Just to finish the summary on the South Auburn portion, the boundaries between the residential and agricultural zone are not proposed to change, but the area in South Auburn along Power Road to the end of the existing residential zoning would change from 1 acre minimum lot size to up to 2 units per acre, so a half an acre minimum lot size, allowing for some additional development there.
Eric, would that additional development be subdividing those lots from 1 acre to half acre?
So it could be, if somebody chose to do that, yes, it could be.
So you're just stacking the houses in there again?
So it would allow
If the
for,
proposal is not you, I apologize for that. The proposal is to stack houses in.
to allow for some additional houses up to double, but, it's not likely that a lot of people would choose to do that, or that the lot configurations would truly allow double, but that the standards would essentially allow double.
There are two other questions that haven't come up tonight that we've talked about in the past. So when we talk about housing, quality of housing, destroying the existing act, if I recall correctly, and this was maybe 8 years ago, you said that any house under $20,000, so 6 or 8 years ago, 20,000, would actually cost more than the taxes that we will get. And by cost, it's whether it's expanding infrastructure, adding schools to that. What is that magic number now? And how does it apply to increasing the number of houses per lot?
So it's, when we looked at housing numbers last fall, and found that over the last 10 years or so, we've seen about a third of a student per household on average.
This is money, I don't care about.
Yep, so, well, I'll back into that. So if you have a third of a student per house, you can assume there's 3 houses worth of taxes per student, essentially. The new houses that we're seeing, especially single-family homes out in South Auburn near the Turnpike, I think somebody mentioned that Buford McFarland development that's happening. Those are houses that are approaching or exceeding $500,000 apiece. If you have a $200,000 house that's paying let's just say $4,000 a year in taxes as a rough number, if you have 3 of those to get to 1 student, then it's $12,000 a year in taxes. The city's portion, I think, for schools on average is about $5,000 per student. After the state subsidy, rough numbers, maybe it's 6. Those numbers start to support the additional kids as long as you don't get to a point where you need to build a new school. You hit that big capital.
Talking about infrastructure, many of the places like from the Baptist Church on Park Avenue does not have water or sewer. I mean, that's what I consider in town. I'm talking about you know this number, because you knew it in the past, so if somebody knows, I don't know you personally, but you personally, know this number. What price housing do we need in order to contribute above the cost of that house in regards to service?
Yeah, we've looked at the amount of houses that the individual departments think they could support services for. We have not identified the exact cost, the full cost of community services. But schools being one of the largest ones, we've looked at that. And schools alone, if 3 houses generates a student, and these are rough numbers, and a student generates $6,000 in cost, then the school alone, each house would have to pay $2,000 in taxes. But there are other costs. There's, trash pickup, there's police responses.
When you told me the 200,000 a number of years ago, at that time, and I believe it's still true, the median house in Auburn was under that number, substantially 6 to 8 years ago. So are we looking at a whole new housing market when we talk about wanting young people and families? We cannot be talking about the $600,000 homes. They don't mix.
Yep.
For volume, for the people that we want to provide jobs. And Auburn is a great place to live and raise children, and that ought to be our selling. And so if we're looking at building $600,000 homes, and if that's what we're going to do, and know that more than half of our population is not going to live in Auburn.
And you have almost half of your city council here listening to this, and cost of community services study is something that we have talked about. And it's something they could choose to do before implementing actual zoning changes. If the number of house lots that our future land use map could create is more than what they've already talked about, then, maybe they'll want to do that before or back off some of the changes.
Thank you.
Bob?
We have to be careful about talking about the price of housing. We can't be talking Cape Elizabeth and Falmouth prices, because that's 30 miles away. I looked through the listing of the assessor's sales for 2019-2020. The average of median of newly constructed single-family houses is about $425,000. I want to make a point which Eric and I have discussed, and that the review of number of school children per housing unit that the city conducted averaged together all housing types, including apartments and single-family houses. Work that I have done elsewhere is there's a distinct difference
between the number of school children in a single-family house, it's about 10 times greater than the number you get out of a two-bedroom apartment. So I would urge, I don't know, we've got a little more work to do, that you get back and separate out the apartments, which typically are not oriented to families with children, to the single-family and maybe two-family dwellings. Another figure I've developed recently, talked with the school department, and the average cost per pupil determined by the state in 2019-2020 was $10,300 per pupil. And that does not include cost of transportation and debt service. Now, we're walking into major debt service to pay off for our share. I think it's 14 million of the extras at the high school that the state is not going to cover. So I'm guessing that when we're paying the full debt service on high school, let's say 3-4 years down the line, we're looking at probably 11 to 12,000 as a per pupil cost. Now, we go back again to if we were getting Cape Elizabeth prices, maybe there's a break-even point, but we're not in the Cape Elizabeth range. We're in the 400, 450 kind of range, and that's going to give us about 10,000 in taxes per year. So we're below break-even if you assume one pupil per single-family house. Now, the difference between single-family houses is that appeals to an age group which is a little small in Auburn, of people who are buying, somewhat older, middle-aged people, 35 to 50, who are buying up from their existing house and looking for the good schools and the new housing and so on. So we've got to make a little more sharpening of the pencil on the data that we've been using, because it does reflect a different view of these things. And a lot of it goes back to the type of housing you're building. If you're building, call it townhouses or apartments or empty nester housing or whatever, those are money makers. But when you're up into single-family houses, the costs get a little dicey, and if you can break even, you're probably doing well.
Thank you. Yes, sir, in the back.
I just want to say, I can't say, so I want to just use a moment to voice support for what you're doing. I actually think you've gotten it exactly right. I'm in my 20s. I am in, I'm a little more exposed, I think, to other people as well, and I think that it's exactly right that the need for available and affordable housing is one of, if not the most important thing that's holding back the economy of the state and the city of Auburn. And I know a lot of people my age who do want to live here and they can't, because they
Yes.
One comment. One, when we talk about inventory, and we have a real estate professional too here, so maybe they can answer this. But inventory, more inventory is going to cause a decrease in values, which means more affordable. Is that the goal? Or is it increase in availability of housing, which means duplexes and 16 units per acre, which is more housing, but not necessarily more inventory, it's not going to affect values? I guess I want to get an idea, because that's why I'm a little nervous where it's a comp plan. We're making decisions here that affect the city in ways that we may not think. But what's the goal? So the idea is more inventory, to lower the cost, I mean, that we make houses cheaper, because there's more houses.
So, yeah, the goal has been to attract more residents, and we've seen, over the last few years, we've seen rents rise significantly. That's a good thing to some extent, because we were, prior to that, at a point where it was really difficult, especially in older housing stock, for a landlord to be able to finance the improvements and justify the investment. So I think it's been a positive thing to some degree that rents have risen that way, but they've risen along with the price of single-family homes so sharply in the last year or so that if they continue to do that, it's really putting new homes or buying an existing home in Auburn out of reach for a lot of people. So there is an element of trying to find that balance point, I guess, where housing still makes sense financially to construct and invest in, but a regular person growing up in Auburn still has access to a housing unit if they choose to buy a home here.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think it's a dynamic, because again, if we do something that adds more inventory, landlords now say they're getting an average price, but we decide we're going to develop more and more and more to lower the price of rent. Is that the goal, or are we going to let the free market decide?
Yeah, the free market to decide, but not to artificially restrict the supply to the point where we're driving prices. But there's a balance, like you said, it's a dynamic situation.
Absolutely, I think, yes.
These were just some examples that were used. A static map, really, in case the other maps didn't work well, the dynamic maps. But we talked about that South Auburn, Danville corner of Powell Road, sort of the inner portion already at the top right. The left-hand side is, so we've talked about that area, Outer Lake Street, Hotel Road, towards the north end of Taylor Pond. And then on the bottom right is sort of the Fletcher Road, Outer Merrill Road near Myers Avenue, over through portions of Beach Hill, would allow up to 16 units per acre as a maximum, as proposed. As I said, at the end of this, if you want to sort of dive into your neighborhood, your property, we're happy to do that. John Blaze is here at one computer. Brian Wood, our assistant city manager, is ready to jump in if we start getting backed up on the third computer over there, and I'm happy to do the same here. The other updates that we expect to see recommendations coming out of the committee on over the next couple of months for the planning board, council, and public to consider is equity. The council's recently adopted an equity statement or policy. We'll be incorporating that to make sure that that lens is used in any changes, and also in looking at what the existing plan says. Promoting food access and growing Auburn's agricultural economy is a brand new chapter that's being worked on. Currently, future land use mapping. We've talked about the residential zones. There'll also be some discussions about the industrial zone, gateways, our access points to our community, Turnpike exit. I think that's pretty well laid out the way that the committee will be proposing it at this point. And then especially in the residential areas and our mall area, our more urban areas, walkability, livability, safety as far as street designs. Then out through our rural areas would be more, safe roadways, not necessarily sidewalks, but maybe shoulders, and sort of off-road recreation as far as open spaces and trails and things like that. With that, we're happy to answer any other questions. We can jump to taking a look at individual roadways with people if that's helpful. Yeah, equity, giving people equal access to opportunities, whether that's for housing, access to recreation, regardless of your income, your age, making sure that everybody has access to the resources that the city's providing.
And paying attention to those who may need different resources, different amounts of resources to be able to get to the same access.
Yes, ma'am.
When I first started doing the confirmation training and the discussion of acres, I thought I really didn't know what 1 acre is. So I looked it up and it's 208.71 feet by 200 acres, 71 feet the other way. And then I think a 16 units on that size of property is boggles my mind. With all that comes with 16 family units living on that size of property. That's
That's what we're here to hear, that feedback, and the council will use this information to adjust.
There be another public, in-person public comments when we get to the next version, incorporating the changes and the suggestions. I know that it's a tight timeline, but this has been extremely helpful to have people in person ask their questions and get their answers. If we look at the next version for the comp plan, that get a vote on the different ones within the neighborhood.
Yeah, staff is open to whatever process the council wants. Our plan is to meet with the comprehensive plan committee on Thursday. Provide them all the feedback that we hear. Hopefully we're moving in the right direction. As well as emails and phone calls. Let them think about what they want to make for a recommendation back to the council. When that comes back to the council, much like it did a few weeks ago, we'll be asking for the council on where we go from there and what the process is. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Just one more thing. I really appreciate this informational session, and I would hope that you will provide a few more. I didn't know anything about this until the Sunday newspaper article. And I think that other people in Auburn may be interested in it as well.
Thank you.
Eric?
Yes.
Please get comments to the meeting in Danville, so the Danville residents will know exactly what the plan.
Another meeting like this in Danville. We've scheduled 3 at this point. I think when we come back from the committee to go to the council, I think that's when we could really take that direction. For any additional help we need. Yes, sir.
Several of the areas of the city, and yet at the same time, we talk about having more people concentrated in the inner city.
See, across the street,
Yep.
which I think the city just recently took. So this is nice, so whatever it is,
I'm gonna pretty quick.
Yes, this is. Come on,
Get the mail.
It's a common planning principle to try to concentrate the housing. I mean, the market dictates how many people want to live in a concentrated environment. But to concentrate the housing in an urban core and then sort of concentrically grow outwards. And that's what we're here to listen to see how much density is acceptable to the community in different areas and how far out do we want to allow for density in the community.
I was visiting him too. He was very welcoming. And he had neighbors across the street who were poor. And you know, people could just, you don't have to have people concentrate their rich people. So they move here. How you word it.
Okay. No, I think whether it's an apartment building or a neighborhood, a mix of all types of people, whether that's income, races, religions, a mix is the healthiest neighborhood. It sounds like that's what you're describing as a mixed income neighborhood with your friends.
Eric, what concerns me, I can see the 16 dwellings per acre. You got great one.
Yep.
I can see that. What concerns me, 7.2, single family on an acre, is that what that is?
Those are condos. Yeah. Yeah, in order to get beyond 4 to 6 units per acre, you're really talking attaching structures with multiple dwellings, whether those are apartments or condos. If you do, you could potentially do 2 half-acre lots with a duplex to get 4 units. Or in some of our zones, you could do slightly over a quarter of an acre to get 4 duplexes per acre.
What I was concerned about is if you go down to North Yarmouth, and you go to North Yarmouth Village, they have the new houses that have been built, and I think they probably got, I think they probably bought 10 of them on a very small acre.
Yeah.
Very small. So that's not what I would like to see.
And that's what we want to hear. What do people want in that area?
Someone looks like Parks Gravel Road, where the space used to be. And right now,
See it.
the units that have now been sold, which there are, they are multiple families living in one unit, which is huge.
Yeah.
So sometimes people think they're
So it might function more like, if you have 2 families in each unit, you're really talking about double that density. Councilor Walker.
Eric, at Fairview School next to it, how many units are sitting on that property right there?
At Fairview School, I can get the numbers, I did not know them off the top of my head.
That ain't more than 2 acres, though, is it?
I could check the lot size. I want to say there was around 28 units there, but I'd have to double check the approvals.
I think that's a better picture to show people for this area around here than the 4 buildings that are up in Graceland. If you're gonna talk about a lot of units, and I'm not in favor of a lot of units either, but it would be a better one to show people because of how close they are.
If you want to sell the project, you're gonna show a price on it and not find it out.
Well, we're not selling it. I want people to see the true thing, what it looks like.
Well, it's a great law. One of the reasons the old and park, I didn't want because it allowed more population. It's a great law. Money parking. Mind Avenue. You want more buildings with enough parking availability. Probably still I'm not sure.
I wanted a cell tower.
Well, that's part of it, but the other part is we have too many spaces for the lot.
Maybe that that's too restrictive. I don't mind.
Yeah, I guess I can't get the acreage on this viewer, but we can get that for you.
Yeah. I'm going to leave you now, thank you. You're welcome.
So we'll summarize feedback from the meeting. And we're really really encouraging people to also fill out detailed comments on the survey. Yes, this session is being recorded. I've taken some notes, John, taken some notes, Brian. Okay, perfect. This one is being recorded, the other two is not. I hope the audio is good, so we'll check the recording and we'll get it up there if it's legible.
Me too.
And I was talking about,
I told her she knew what you meant, but she still didn't sound really.
Committee is recommending a reduction in the parking standards so that shared parking will be legalized, public parking will be legalized. On-street and off-street public parking, but not to let parking drive what can be built, let the market.
I go one, seems very beautiful. I don't have any children. I pay a lot of money in taxes. I have 3 houses in Auburn.
I told her to sell for the chocolate.
No, I would encourage you, is to try to get to a destination where public transportation could work in some cases. But I would encourage you to provide your feedback to the council and planning board. That's what the current recommendation from the committee says, is that we should move towards less reliance on buses.
No, this is a what?
They'll use it well more than we require for commercial and residential as well. But there's some that are comfortable building with using public parking.
You're transplant too.
If you're gonna continue growth, I could have really talked about it. I know.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, if anybody wants to look at your individual lot, feel free to come see one of the
And you need to bring in fresh blood.